I'd like to take a few minutes and kind of play off some of the things that were said this afternoon. Bob is, you can see what a heart he has for his business and what God has put him into. By the way, as you have to disclose everything. I have a walker, so I need to have this person on my side. But I have to tell you this, we also have a tractor-based lawnmower at our place, and the guys that do the work use the walker. They don't use the other one. So there is some justice here. He talked about calling. We're all called. You're called to what God has wired you to do. And there is this sense of wiring that's in you. And oftentimes people take this wiring and sort of try to ignore it because, well, I can't believe that God would really want me to be excited about this aspect of my life. I mean, Bob's a great example of that calling. He's excited about what he does. He's excited about the work. He's excited about the engineering, excited about the things that they do and how it works within the company. That's calling. The thing that most people don't do, and I'd like to challenge you to consider, is calling requires definition of what that call is. I would guess that a large percentage of the people in this room have never really defined what that is. Let me tell you what happened to me. When I was very young and I was I'd made a decision that I did not want to be a weekend warrior for Christ. Starting a new business, and I thought, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a man of God, but you're going to have to show me, Lord. And earlier it was mentioned that how many of you have not been discipled by John. Dave. Anyway, about being discipled. I didn't get any discipling. I mean, people that I knew nothing about doing business and being a believer. But I went to a couple of retreats, and at one of the retreats, the man stood there and he said, have you built a life purpose? He says, I never even thought about it. What is your mission? Every person in the Bible, every leader in the Bible, if you look, you will find his or her mission statement there. Paul's is probably one of the best examples. If you look at Romans chapter 15, verse 16, he specifically lays out what his mission is to the Gentile community. Now, what's really interesting, and likewise with Jesus, he said, it is for this purpose that I came. He specifically lays it out. It says in Acts, it says that the disciples, their role was to be a witness. That's what the role is. That's in chapter 2. So you look at this and you go, that's really kind of interesting. Well, how does that play out? And there are a couple things about doing something like this. When somebody says you should write down the 3 things, because if you get into too many things in your mission statement, you'll never remember them. There's a limitation on what you can remember. So at the end of this conference, I thought, my view is if you go to a conference and you go home the next day and you haven't determined when you leave to do one thing, I don't care what that is, but one thing that you come out of this conference with, then this conference has been fun, interesting, entertaining, but meaningless. So it is the one thing, and the Lord has been speaking to all of you about whatever that one thing is. But in that case, for me, it was writing a mission statement. And it's a scary thought. It's a scary prospect. I put the piece of paper on my desk. I'm a neatnik. I like my desk cleared at the end of the day because it helps me to think. And my secretary saw this piece of paper sitting on my desk. 2 weeks passed by, and she came in and she said, would you like me to remove that piece of paper? Yeah, maybe I'm not strong enough anymore. I said, no, leave it there. And probably 3 weeks went by because it was a reminder of what I was supposed to be doing. And then one day, I wrote down one line. And then a couple of weeks later, another line. And a couple of weeks after that, a third one. I said, that's it. I think that's what God has in mind. Now, that particular mission statement, which is my mission statement, it's in the book, you'll see it there, but it has served me for 40 years. And the thing is that I go back to it on a regular basis. I think about it all the time. Is this really inside of my mission? Well, what's fascinating about it, which is also fascinating about the mission statements that you see in the Scripture, is that rarely do they relate to the specific physical work you do. You know, if your mission is your company, you're missing something. If the people are the mission of your life in your company, that's a whole nother matter. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? See, if the mission becomes your company, then all of a sudden it's everything. You know, the company will not last, but the work that we do for Christ lasts eternity. And eternity. And it's, you know, my company is gone now. The one that I started is gone. The second one that I built that was worth a lot of money has been bought by somebody else. There's the oldest company in the world. It's about 400 years, and it's going down. It's the Royal Bank of Scotland. And it's not doing very well these days. These things do not last. But the things that we do for God, the mission that we have for God lasts. So it's interesting that if you look at Jesus' mission, it was very different from his work. The mission that Paul had was to the Gentiles, but he was a tent maker. You see, we get confused in this area and sometimes don't understand that mission and work to accomplish that mission are two different things. Not that they're both not equally important, but they are. You know, and so we look at this issue of celebrating life, the concept that Pastor Mike's talked about today, which is, you know, focusing on people, but understanding that most of them are in the business world. That's what we do, you know. And there's the business of church. There's the business of, you know, indeed of, and separate from the church itself. There's the business of hospitals, of medicine, of agriculture, of, you know, production, of sales, whatever these things are. Those are all businesses, but within those are people, and that's our mission field. And the question that we need to think about is, what is God calling you specifically to do? What are the three things that you right now? The good news is most people don't want to do this because there are two things. One, it's I'm accountable to somebody, and it's got to be to God. All of a sudden, I've got a list, and one day he's going to say, hey, let's take a look at this list together. You know, I'm going, oh, gee, I forgot all about that. You know, and the second is, what if I write the wrong things down? Well, here's the good news. We all have pencils with erasers. If it isn't right, change it. You know, but write it. Don't be afraid to write it. You know, what is it that God is telling you he wants you to do? Because now when you go to work in the morning and you speak about the job, and somebody says, we have a crisis in our inventory situation, and another person walks up and says, I'm going through a rough day. I need some help. And you've got 24 hours to solve the inventory crisis problem because you're a public company. I went through this. And you are about to report your earnings, and you've got to figure out how to solve the problems that you have. And somebody comes with that kind of a message. Where do you spend your time? Well, where's your mission statement? What is your mission? You know, I had a young lady come into me, and she said, I have a real problem. And I said, I'm thinking, I don't need this problem right now. I got other bigger problems in my mind, but I'm thinking, wait a minute, my mission statement, the first point was to be a witness to my employees. So I thought, okay, that is number one. She sat down and she says, you have all these tracts in the lobby. She says, I hate it. I don't want that stuff. And in California, you know, most litigious state in the union, and religion do not go very well together. But I was serving these folks, and not that I'm good at this, but, you know, it's what I felt God called us to do. So, you know, this conversation, I said, look, I know that you're not satisfied with these, but the tracts have been there ever since you came, so you knew they were there when you came. And and as long as I'm here, they'll stay there because it's what I believe. It's not necessarily what you believe, and that's okay with me. She said, no, that's not the problem. She says, I don't know. I've read all those tracts. She says, I don't know how to accept Christ in my life. And she began to cry. Well, right there, we both kneeled in my office and prayed for her to receive Christ. That was the greatest miracle. You know, and it's not about me, it's about him. Because at the end of the day, my inventory problem was solved by God. It turns out the whole thing was resolved, and they didn't need me. But it was the tyranny of that urgent thing that almost kept me from doing what God really calls us to do. So today, my call to you, my appeal to you, my charge to you is that we have a responsibility to God. We have businesses, and we have responsibilities to making these businesses work. But we need to, in the tyranny of the urgent, understand what the long-term perspective really is. Take the time. Think about taking the time. This is the one takeaway from this meeting, if you do, to, you can go look in the chapter in the book, I speak about this, but take a look at your mission statement. And if you've never written one, write it. Put a piece of paper on your desk and commit to it until you have written it down, knowing that if it isn't quite right, God will tell you, and you can change it. You can fix it. But till you have a direction and a plan in your life, it's going to be really difficult to stay on track. The conversation came up earlier with Phyllis and the question of how do I deal with a situation like this? Well, it goes right back to that mission statement. There are no procedural systems how to solve our problems, but there are priorities that God gives us, and that conversation with Him in terms of understanding what He's calling us to do is what will make us successful. And success is around what God is calling success, not what the world calls success. And by the way, He'll add that to you because He's promised to do it as we focus on the things of Him. And so with that, I turn it back to Pastor.